We received several reports on Friday of wild turkey sightings in downtown Windsor, and I'm not talking about bourbon. I'm talking about the kind of wild turkey you might see in a farm field or in a wooded area, say like Ojibwe Park. Dan Lebedik is a biologist with the Essex Region Conservation Authority, and he's going to explain, or at least try to explain, these strange sightings for us. Dan's on the telephone. Good morning.
Good morning, Tony. How are you?
I'm good. What's going on?
Well, you know what? It never ceases to amaze me. I've been working as a biologist for 27 years, and you always get something new. I am not quite sure why wild turkeys would be hanging around downtown city of Windsor, other than I can probably assume they came from the population that is in and around Ojibwe Prairie Complex, Ojibwe Park. They were basically reintroduced to southern Ontario back starting in the late 80s. We got our population, I think, in the early 90s, early to mid-90s. Originally in the town of Amherstburg, the former township of Malden, where the Ministry of Natural Resources reintroduced wild turkeys. They had been basically extirpated from our region for over a century. They were overhunted. Reintroduced back in the early to mid-90s, and since that time, they have basically just expanded their range from the original release point. So there is a relatively large population in the Ojibwe Prairie Complex, and I am assuming that this is where these wild turkeys have come from.
Now, when you say relatively large population, do you know how many birds there actually are?
We don't know exactly how many, but there's enough that we hear about sightings all the time, and I see them quite often in the rural parts of Essex County as I drive to and from the office to my home. So you're going to see them out in the rural landscape. That's why it is surprising to me that they're hanging around downtown Windsor near the casino, is that it's just not typical habitat for them.
Do they, to the best of your knowledge, do they have a comfort level with urban environments in much the same way that geese do? Can you fill me in on that?
Yeah, we have seen them here in the town of Essex in a subdivision behind our office where they'll just cross the street, they'll hang out in the middle of the street, brazenly looking at you as you drive towards them and not getting out of the way. So that's one very important point I want to stress to people, is that they could be a traffic hazard if they're out in the middle of the street and they're not moving. We don't want to see anybody get into an accident because wildlife actually interact with your vehicles. So they are quite brazen. They hang around people's neighborhoods. They'll be in their yards just foraging about. It seems as though they're very used to human activity.
Are they as messy as geese? And I think you know exactly what I mean.
I have not heard any complaints with regards to wild turkeys being messy, like I hear about Canada geese all the time.
What about the behavior of these birds? Geese, of course, you approach them, they just tend to kind of turn and waddle away. What about wild turkeys?
They kind of do the same thing, although depending upon what they're doing at the time, if they're trying to defend nesting territory, they may actually be somewhat aggressive. They can get aggressive. They are rather large birds. The average weight of the females can reach up to about 10 pounds. The males can be up to about 15 to 17 pounds, so they're pretty heavy birds, and they can be aggressive.
What do they eat?
They'll eat a wide variety of things. They're basically omnivores. They'll eat acorns, seeds, grains, little green shoots, but they'll also eat things like grasshoppers and other types of insects. They can even also eat small snakes and things like that.
There are people who firmly believe that there are too many geese around the area, and a lot of that is related to what they leave behind. At what point might the population of wild turkeys become any sort of concern?
Well, when it starts interacting with humans in a way that we find to be objectionable. My main concern is when wildlife and humans interact, that it doesn't become a safety concern, especially with traffic. We hear all the time about collisions with deer and also Canada geese, things like that, birds, other forms of wildlife as they're driving through, especially the west end of the city of Windsor, town of LaSalle, where you've got large amounts of natural areas and, of course, large amounts of wildlife populations interacting with cars. That's my main concern. We don't want to see people get into accidents. The issue being is that in those types of urban environments, such as the city of Windsor, also the town of LaSalle and some other municipalities near the city of Windsor, do not permit hunting. And that's for obvious reasons. Out in the rural landscape, of course, hunting in southern Ontario is a very popular sport. So generally, populations of wildlife are kept in check across southern Ontario through the Ministry of Natural Resources hunting, issuing of licenses and a number of tags you issue, and they kind of monitor and control wildlife populations through the take, through the hunting opportunities. But in the city of Windsor, town of LaSalle, where you don't have hunting, you don't really have predation upon these types of species. So their populations can get large. There's nothing to keep them in check. So that's why we have overabundant Canada goose populations in these areas that are local populations. And we may see that with wild turkeys. I don't anticipate a lot of damage associated with them. What I do is encourage people to get used to living with wildlife as we actually do what we're supposed to be doing, is protecting our natural features, connecting them together, and making them more of a vibrant system. So this is for us and for wildlife, and we just have to get used to living with wildlife.
Look, you know and I know that eventually someone will begin to feed these creatures.
Yes, that's a no-no in every aspect for any species of wildlife. Do not feed them. They become accustomed to that, and then they rely upon it, and then people say, oh, well, wait a minute, I didn't anticipate the impact of this on my property. I don't want to feed them anymore, and they just don't go away. Or they'll go to your neighbor or whatever. That is something that we should never do, is feed wildlife.
What if you don't want them around? Is there anything you can do?
Well, you can call sometimes an animal removal service. You can look for them in the phone book. They're not necessarily covered under the animal control officer at the municipality. Those are mostly for stray cats and dogs, domesticated animals. Wild animals is another story. There are a number of animal removal services that a professional come out, and he is licensed to actually do that type of catch, and he could relocate them. That's probably the best bet. But in any case where there's a wildlife incidental take, let's say, for example, you do happen to interact with one with your car and kill it, those types of things are regulated under the Fish and Wildlife Game Act, and you should report it to the Ministry of Natural Resources just so there's a record. Because if you actually do have that in your possession and you don't have a tag because of hunting, you need to record that. It is called an incidental take. Just out of curiosity, if you're wondering, if you do hit a wild turkey with your car and kill it, just report it to the Ministry of Natural Resources, the M&R tips line. They will record that, and then it's yours.
If you want it.
If you want it.
All right, Dan. Thank you so much. Good to talk to you.
You're very welcome, Tony.
That is Dan Lebedick, a biologist with the Essex Region Conservation Authority. If you'd like to see photos of these urban wild turkeys, you can see them on our website, cbc.ca/Windsor.